Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Emily and I make videos about beauty and about books. And today we're going to be doing a little chatty get ready with me, creating the look that you see here. And we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people think is controversial, a lot of people think is kind of no duh, but we're going to be talking about privilege and about systemic oppression and about what we can do to make our world a better place. So I would love to have you, please stick around, and I just ask that you keep everything respectful and kind. So we're going to go ahead and get into the get ready with me. Alright, so my friends, I'm not going to be talking a ton about the products today that I'm using on my face because I really want to focus on the conversation that we're going to have, but everything will be linked down in the description, so if you are interested in checking out, using, or just knowing what I'm using on my face, then just check out the description box below. I'll probably mention a few things, like I will be using my Through My Eyes palette from ColourPop, which is gorgeous, it's so pretty, but as always, everything will be linked in the description. So I'm going to start out with my Beauty Bakery Wake and Bake Face Oil. I like to screw it really tight so it doesn't get messy, but sometimes it makes it a little challenging. But today I really just wanted to talk about some, stuff that might seem incongruous with like putting makeup on my face, but I wanted to chat a little bit about privilege and what it means to have privilege, because I think that it's a topic that's very important and very relevant, but it's definitely something that is often misunderstood. So I wanted to chat a little bit about it today and hopefully educate some people who might not have a ton of knowledge. If you don't know, I double majored in college in English and gender, sexuality, women's studies, and in my gender studies classes we talked a lot about privilege, about inequality, about all kinds of stuff. We didn't just talk about, like women and how great we are, which, like women are great, but we talked a lot about privilege. So I wanted to share some of that knowledge I have and hopefully start a conversation or continue a conversation that some people might have heard about. So basically, one of the most important things to know is that there are things called axes of oppression. So basically, just your life is going to be hard or different levels of difficult because of some facts about you. So for example, I am a woman, so that means that I would experience sexism in some circumstances, right? But because I am a white woman, I'm not going to experience racism. So somebody who is a black woman would have a lot of difficulties that I would not have because nobody is going to discriminate against me because of the color of my skin. So that is what people refer to when they say white privilege. But when people talk about white privilege, a lot of the times people come back with, well, what about poor white people? Or what about Obama, right? Which a lot of the times people are not saying that as like a good faith argument, they're just saying that to be annoying or argumentative, but I do think it's important to talk about, right? So yeah, poor white people will have more difficulties than, somebody who is really well off economically. However, those difficulties will not be compounded by the color of their skin. So they might still have difficulty finding or keeping a job. They might have difficulty, buying clothes that help make them look presentable and are taken seriously at work. However, they will be allowed to wear their natural hair to work. However, they will be more likely to have their resume picked up because of the name on the top is not going to be automatically judged because of the presumed ethnicity. And it's important to remember that it's not a contest, right? Like, people don't want to be oppressed. Nobody wants to have a difficult life. So it's important to not see it as a competition of who has the most oppression, because that's not helpful to anybody. What is helpful is to recognize areas where you do have privilege. So that might be because you are white, or it might be because you are a man, or it might be because you are able-bodied, and so you never have to think about if you can access something because you don't have to worry about using a wheelchair. You also might have privilege because you are heterosexual, right? So I think we all remember gay marriage was only legalized federally a few years ago. It was really very recent. And even interracial marriage was only legalized relatively recently. It was like 50 years ago, but there are many people alive today who remember a time when people were not allowed to marry people of other races. So if you are a straight white person who is dating a straight white person, that's going to be a privilege that other people, people aren't going to look at you and judge your relationship based on what the other person looks like, right? You're not going to experience the same level of like harassment in the street that two lesbian women or two gay men or two otherwise visibly LGBTQ people might experience just from being themselves. So something I think is important to talk about that I don't hear a lot is that some aspects of privilege are things that we do want everyone to have access to, and other aspects or things that we call privilege are things that are unfair that we should basically be getting rid of entirely. So for example, white people are more likely to be hired even when resumes are identical if it's a traditionally African American sounding name or a traditionally basically any other race, you know. So for example, somebody named Shaniqua, her resume would be less likely to be picked up than somebody named Susan, because Shaniqua is presumed to be black, Susan is going to be presumed to be white. So even if their resumes are 100% identical, Shaniqua's resume is going to go to the bottom. And they've done numerous studies on that. I'll link some down below. But that is not fair, right? We want to just get rid of that entirely. Nobody should have an unfair advantage like that. However, white people do have the privilege of not being as likely to be harassed or stopped and frisked walking down the street, right? People aren't going to presume that you are loitering when you're in your own neighborhood, that you're up to no good when you're trying to get into your own house, right? Or, you know, I'm sure you could find times when it did happen, but it's far less likely. And that's something that's a privilege that everybody should have. Does that make sense? So, you know, nobody should be able to have their resume pushed to the top of the pile, but everybody should be able to go to their own home without being accused of breaking in. And I think part of the reason that some people are so averse to the idea that they have privilege, part of it comes from that people don't want to give up good things like not being presumed to be breaking into their home, right? And sometimes people don't want to give up good things that benefit them that are unfair to others, like the resume thing. And those are really just a couple of examples. There are so many examples of ways that people experience privilege. And it's really important to remember that just because you might be experiencing privilege in one way does not mean that anybody, literally anybody, is saying that your life is super easy, you've never had a hardship. It's just saying that there are multiple ways in which your life is easier than someone else's, or multiple ways in which things just don't affect your life. They don't make your life harder. So it's not to say that your life is easy because of white privilege. It's just saying that the color of your skin doesn't make your hardships more difficult. I hope that makes sense. So I've been talking a lot about skin color because that is a lot of where the current conversation is at in the world, right? We're talking a lot about Black people because of the Black Lives Matter movement, but there are many different ways that people might experience privilege or oppression. So for example, it might be your skin color, it also could be your race or ethnicity, it could be your sexuality, your gender identity, right? There's so many ways. It could be that you are able-bodied or you are disabled. It could be that you are neurodivergent, like you're autistic or you have ADHD, right? There are so many different ways. It could be the language that you speak at home. In our current times with coronavirus right now, it is a privilege to be able to stay home and not have to go out and work somewhere where you're going to be exposed, right? And this is really a topic a lot of people don't like to talk about, and I understand why, because it is difficult and it does ask you to kind of examine yourself, and it's uncomfortable to think about things that are good in your life that you may not have earned, right? Like, nobody wants to feel like something good in their life has happened and they haven't earned it, but it is true, right? I have not done anything differently than a Black person to be allowed to wear my natural hair to work and not be shamed for it. I have not done anything differently than a Muslim person to be allowed to have my religious holidays off of school and them not to, right? Those are unearned privileges, but it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person or that I have done anything wrong personally. However, it is a system in our society that I benefit from unfairly, and it's really important to recognize that, and you do have to put your pride aside and realize that someone asking you to recognize where you have unearned privileges is not somebody calling you a bad person. They are saying that you need to understand the way our society works, and right, we can't attack problems or tackle issues if we don't even recognize that those issues are there. So I also wanted to talk about a term you might have heard of, but you might not know what it means, and that is intersectionality. So intersectionality was coined by an incredible thinker named Kimberly Crenshaw, And it basically means that we all have, like I've been talking about, we all have so many different identities, right? So many different pieces of ourselves, right? I'm a woman. I am also straight. I'm white, right? Those are things that you might not think of as pieces of your identity, but they are, right? They're things that affect the way that you live your life. So depending on those pieces of your identity, you experience the world in different ways, right? Even somebody else who is a straight white woman might experience the world differently if she is in a wheelchair or if she is Jewish, right? Those are things that are different. But it does change the way that you experience our society. And our society is built for certain people. You do have to remember, in our history, right? They said all men are created equal. And I shouldn't have to tell you, right, why that means that our society was only built for some people. But I will tell you anyway, right? All men are created equal. Leaves out women entirely, right? We all know. But also, those people who wrote all men are created equal enslaved other people. So those people were clearly not thought of, right? Native Americans were not thought of, right? The people they came and stole land from. So, you know, despite any noble ideas, our society absolutely was built for certain people, and it was built to exclude other people. Your identities affect how you experience the world, and since everyone is an individual, everyone has a different combination of identities, you're going to be experiencing the world in a unique and personal way. And some people might have, you know, everyone's going to experience privilege in some way or another, right? But some people might have different intersecting axes of oppression. So basically, we're going to go back to my poor white person example, right? They're economically disadvantaged. So they have, that is a difficulty in their life, right? They have a lot of problems that come with being poor, but they are white, so it does not intersect with any kind of oppression that comes from having a darker skin color. But if you are black and you are poor, those are two intersecting identities that at this point where they meet, right, makes your life more difficult because it's reinforcing that society was not built for you. But I do feel like people throw around the term intersectionality often without completely explaining what it means. And it's really just the idea that all of these different causes and movements are interconnected, right? So that's why in my gender studies classes, we didn't just learn about, you know, women's rights and feminism, but we also learned about racial justice. And, you know, part of that had to do with the amazing professors that I had, but we also learned about, you know, transgender issues and about LGBTQ issues in general. It's because all of these things are interconnected, and when you talk about one issue, you often have to bring up other issues too, because the way that somebody experiences the world is going to be dependent on many, many different factors and the way that these identities intersect. All right, now that we've talked a little bit about privilege and about intersectionality, I do want to talk about why is it important? Like, why should we care? I hope that you care, you know, about injustice and about people's rights, but if I have to make the argument to you, I will, right? I want to talk about why we should care. So basically, you should care because it's the right thing to do, right? You should care if people have rights in this country, if people are treated equally. But there are so many things, it goes so deep, and many people are not aware of how deep oppression runs in this country. A lot of people cling to those ideals, like I talked about, all men are created equal, right? Things like that are pushed to us as this is what our country is built on, these are the amazing things that we stand for, right? Which is wonderful. However, it's not entirely the correct narrative. And I wanted to talk specifically about an issue I'm passionate about, which is school segregation. And you're probably like, Emily, shut up. Like, schools desegregated a long time ago. Brown versus Board of Education, right? Like, that doesn't exist. All right, then tell me why at my school is vastly majority minority students, but a school in the same county 15 minutes away is going to be majority white, right? You wouldn't call that segregated? And a lot of people deflect with, well, it's just because of the neighborhoods they draw from. And that's where we really get into it, because why do they draw from those neighborhoods? Why are the neighborhoods themselves, right? Why can you point out this is a black neighborhood, this is a Hispanic neighborhood, this is a white neighborhood, right? And a lot of that has to do with actual legislation that used to exist, right? That racist legislation that was in place that we now say we've gotten past it, but things like redlining, highly recommend you look up redlining, way too much for me to explain here. But basically it was saying that, you know, back when they were allowed to explicitly not sell houses to black people, right? People bought certain houses in certain neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods took on a certain character based on the laws of who was allowed to live where. And even though those laws don't exist anymore, the character of those neighborhoods, the reputations of those neighborhoods, things like that are still in place. And that comes out in schools, that comes out in the stores that are put in places, right? You could look at where they build Trader Joe's. Basically, once you learn to recognize it, you will see privilege and oppression everywhere, because it really is so ingrained in our society. And we don't really often realize it, especially those of us who don't experience as much oppression in as many of our identities, right? There are many things that my friends who are people of color have informed me about that I just shamefully had never even thought of, right? Like, it just had never occurred to me how much work my friends who are Hispanic had to do translating for their parents, because like I never had to do that. Why would I have ever thought about that? But then when I learned that, you know, when my parents had parent-teacher conferences, I just got to stay home with a babysitter and have a great time. And when my friends had parent-teacher conferences, they had to go and they had to be the translator between the teacher and their parent, right? Just little things that you might not even think about. But once you start to think and once you start to notice, it becomes absolutely unavoidable, and you see how entrenched it is in our society. So we've talked a little bit about why we should care. We've talked about what the problems are. We've defined some terms. We've talked about why we should care. The next question you probably are going to ask is, okay, well, what can we do? Because I can't go back and rewrite history and make it so that no one ever enslaved anybody else. I can't go back and rewrite old laws that allowed people to discriminate in housing. So what can I actually do? Why would anybody blame me for something that I didn't do? And I think that is a lot of people's attitude is, well, I never owned slaves. I never participated in any kind of segregation. I didn't make any laws, right? That's how a lot of people feel. But the truth is that even if you did not originate these systems, even if you don't agree with these systems, you still benefit from the systems. I benefit from the fact that my name is Emily, so my resume is much more likely to be put on the top of the stack than somebody with a name that doesn't sound like a stereotypical white girl name, right? I'm a white woman in elementary education. And if you don't think that that's a privilege, then you're not paying attention. So even if you don't believe in or don't support these systems of oppression in our society, you still benefit from them. And it's really important to recognize that, because only then can we actually start to dismantle them. So when we talk about dismantling systems of oppression, right, that sounds pretty radical, and that is, to be honest, like fairly radical language, and I understand why that might be off-putting, because systems of oppression, like I said, are like essential to our society, right? If you say systems of oppression, you might as well be saying American history, the American government, right? All of these different things that are integral to our society. So there are so many schools of thought on how best to go about helping the problem, right? So I'm not going to tell you what to think about different political issues or different human rights issues or different social justice issues, because that's really not my place. But I will encourage you to do your research and figure out what you believe, right? Read different papers, read different books, follow activists on Twitter and see what they're saying, right? Because there are so many things that I felt a certain way about, or I felt no way about. And then I read what people were saying, and I was able to form an opinion because I took in other people's opinions and I thought about it and I decided what I believed. I do think personally, in my opinion, I think it's important to use the systems that we do have right now to make change in the best ways that we can. So, for example, in my life, as a teacher, I'm told certain standards that I have to teach, right? So there are certain things we need to cover in history, certain things we need to cover in science, And I have to teach those because, you know, like that's my job, is teaching the Virginia standards. If I'm teaching the scientific method, let's use that for example. If I'm teaching the scientific method, I can teach it in many, many different ways. But a way that would reinforce current systems of oppression would be to learn about exclusively white male scientists, right? And that is perfectly acceptable, right? In many, many schools, is you learn exclusively about white male scientists. So then your idea of a scientist is like Albert Einstein, and that's all. However, I can do my part by exposing my students to scientists who look more like them, right? A wide range of skin tones, a wide range of nationalities, women, men, right? There are so many people who have made important scientific contributions who look all different kinds of ways. So that's something that's so, so small. But I know that when I was growing up, I didn't really hear about any female scientists at all until maybe middle school. We learned about Marie Curie. And that's like kind of it until high school. We learned about Rosalind Franklin, right? I didn't learn about any Black scientists until I was in college and did some research on my own. But that's something small that I can do, right? It takes no extra effort because I have to plan the lesson anyway about the scientific method, about scientists, about how scientists solve problems. It takes no extra effort for me to make sure that I include people from different backgrounds. And that makes a big difference for my students and the way that they are picturing the world. So that's a really small example of something that I personally can and try to do to help, you know, dismantle some of the systems of oppression in our society, right? Because I'm a teacher, I focus a lot on school and about what I can teach and what I can do in school, the books I put in my classroom library. If you're not a teacher, right, you're probably not going to be able to influence what happens in the classroom very much. However, you can make sure that your workplace is a good place for people of color to work, right? You can make sure that your workplace is a good place for women, a good place for LGBTQ people. It's a good place for disabled people, right? You can advocate. Did you know churches don't have to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act? Places of worship don't have to be accessible. You can advocate at your place of worship to make it more accessible to people who speak other languages, to people who are disabled, right? All kinds of things like that. There are so many things you can do. You can vote. That's a big one. You can call or write to your representatives. You can talk to the people in your life. I think that's often one of the biggest ways that you can make change. And I know for me, a lot of the ways that I have been influenced or I have had my mind opened to different perspectives has been either people in my life talking to me, recommending things for me to read, or just broadening my sources on social media or, you know, on the news, right? Just finding information from different places than I previously was. And I think that that holds a lot of people back. The idea that, you know, oppression is such a big idea. Privilege is such a big idea, right? I know that I have unearned privilege from my skin color, but I can't control my skin color, right? But what I can control is the actions that I take, and I can use my privilege. And that's the last thing I really want to talk about, is how to use your privilege for good, right? If you've got this unearned advantage in life, you might as well use it for something good, right? Unfortunately, right, it's not fair, but people listen to white people more. That's an example of privilege, right? People listen to white people more than they listen to Black people. It's not fair, and it shouldn't be that way, but it is a fact of life. And when we accept those facts of life, the only way we can change it, right, is by talking about it and by using that privilege. So since I know that people are more likely to listen to me than they are to listen to a Black woman, it's my job to talk about these things, make sure that my stance, my opinion is known, make sure that I put information out there for people to access, and also my job to amplify the voices of others who might not otherwise be listened to. And I think the most important thing in a conversation about privilege is to not get defensive. It's really, really easy, and I understand how easy it is to get defensive when people are saying that you have unearned benefits in your life, right? Especially if you're focused on the small, minute details of your life where things might be hard, right? Things are hard for people, and no one is denying that. But it's really important in a conversation about privilege not to get defensive and not to put your own personal opinions and ideas and life experiences above what people are talking about, which is systemic oppression, right? Things that are built into our society. People aren't necessarily, right, saying that you specifically are a bad person, you need to make these big changes in your life, right? People aren't necessarily saying that. What people are saying is that you benefit from a society that is inherently unfair. You need to recognize how you benefit. You need to recognize that our society is inherently unfair, and you need to work with people to help make positive change. All right, so this is the finished look today. I'm pretty happy with this. And again, I used the Through My Eyes palette from ColourPop. This is my first time using it, and it's gorgeous, and I can't wait to play with more of the shades in there. This like hot pink shade called Lomo is really calling to me. I'm excited to use that one in the future. But thank you so much for sticking around today. Thank you for getting ready with me. As always, all of my products will be linked down below. And I know that this is kind of a touchy topic, and like some people consider it controversial, but I think it's really important to talk about, and I appreciate you sitting and listening, and I would love, love, love to have a respectful conversation in the comments below. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Please check out the resources that I have linked in the description box and do some reading. Check out the different things that I've recommended, check out the people I've recommended. I am seriously gonna link a ton of stuff down there, so definitely check it out. Let me know what you think, and remember to keep it respectful and keep it kind in the comments. And please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I do new videos on Saturdays, which are makeup videos, and Tuesdays, which are book videos, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to any new videos that I have. All right, thank you so much, guys. Bye.